Deficit, schmeficit. To hear some Democrats tell it, Republicans can just stuff it. No big stink because not as much red ink. Even some newspaper columnists weighing in, convinced that a deficit of less than $500 billion is proof that we're actually rolling in the bucks. Ohio Republican Senator Bob Portman begs to differ. Senator, boy, all of a sudden we get to only $500 billion and we think we're rolling in the dough.
Yeah, Neil, huge problem. As you know, the Congressional Budget Office, which is the nonpartisan group up here that tells us what's going on with the budget, says not so. They say the deficit's getting worse, not better. They say $10 trillion more is going to be added in the next 10 years. Then they say in the 10 years after that, another 30 trillion. And then in the 10 years after that, they suggest another 70 trillion. So, look, it's going the wrong way.
All right, so if it's not as much of a focus point or worry, how do Republicans remind people that every time you pile up more deficits, bigger deficits, whether they're of the same type they were a few years ago, they're just being added to our debt? How do you bring that home to people?
Well, I think a couple ways. One is you talk about how it does affect our economy, even today. And there's plenty of economic studies out there showing this, but as you have bigger and bigger debts and deficits, you're not leaving enough room for the private economy. It does impact our economy today. And we need to do a better job of explaining that. And then second, we've got to talk about our kids. I mean, they're getting left saddled with this. And I think most Americans do not believe that their children and grandchildren ought to be left paying for the excesses of our generation. And
do you ever get the feeling, though, Senator, that people come back at you and say, blah, 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 we'll worry about it later on. And now we've had this type, best way I can compare this is we're in the eye of the storm. It's passing over relatively calm. And to your point, we know that this is going to accelerate and get worse in future years as our generation starts retiring and the like. But it falls on deaf ears.
Well, the other way to talk about it, Neil, to be sure people do get it, is to put it in terms of the household budget. I mean, we're talking about just a fundamental disconnect here between the way Americans have been told they got to live their lives and the way the federal government lives its life. And people have to understand that, they would be bankrupt if they did what the federal government does, which is to spend way more than it takes in every year. And by the way, we've also got to make the argument better. It's not about taxes. In other words, we've got tax revenues going up during this period we're talking about, actually to historic levels. And yet, because the spending so far outpaces the tax revenue, there's no way to catch up. Under the income tax, it's actually not possible to catch up with the spending that's going to be occurring in 25, 30, 35 years from now. So we just got to make, it's an obvious point to anybody who has to keep a family budget or is trying to run a small business. But we've got to make that point to all Americans that, this is a problem that is going to get worse, and it's going to come back, not just to hurt us in our economy today, but it's really immoral to do to future generations.
I think it's immoral as well, sir, the mainstream media to say, well, only $500 billion deficits, we can all walk away now. That's pretty wrong, too.
Well, the Congressional Budget Office tells us within 8 short years, they're going to be back to $1 trillion, and then it dramatically increases beyond that. And that, by the way, assumes no recessions, no wars, none of the kind of problems. It's a rosy scenario.
Absolutely.
So I think, ultimately this is a moral question, and it's a question as to whether we're going to just sort of turn our heads and, allow this to occur, or whether we're going to actually deal with this issue in a way that's responsible for current and future generations.
All right. Senator Portman, thank you, as always. Good having you.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be on, buddy. Take care.